In the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, a rancher woke to find every gate open, every pen empty, and enormous barefoot tracks leading into the forest. The animals weren't scattered, they were led in formation toward the wilderness. What wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Chen discovered next would force her to choose between scientific fame and an impossible promise. Some secrets must die with those who keep them. The call came at 4:47 a.m., pulling Dr. Sarah Chen from uneasy sleep in her university housing in Missoula. The voice on the other end belonged to Dale Whitmore, a third-generation cattle rancher whose property bordered the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. "Doc, I need you to see this before I call anyone else, before the sheriff, before Fish and Wildlife. Just you." Sarah sat up, switching on the lamp. Dale wasn't the type to panic. She'd worked with him for 3 years on carnivore conflict mitigation, teaching him to use fladry and guard dogs instead of rifles when wolves or grizzlies came too close to his livestock. He understood predator behavior better than most biologists she knew. "What happened?" "Something opened every gate on my property last night. All of them. Horses, cattle, goats, chickens. Even the damn barn cats are gone. But they're not scattered, Doc. They're organized. And the tracks." His voice dropped. "You need to see the tracks." 20 minutes later, Sarah was driving south on Highway 93, her field kit rattling in the passenger seat. The October dawn was just beginning to paint the Bitterroot Mountains in shades of rose and amber. Fresh snow dusted the higher peaks. The first of the season, cottonwoods along the valley floor blazed gold against dark conifers. She turned onto the gravel road leading to Dale's ranch, passing under the weathered wooden arch that read Whitmore Land and Cattle Est, 1962. The main house sat in a clearing surrounded by barns, corrals, and fenced pastures. Dale stood by the nearest paddock, his breath visible in the cold air, his border collie Molly pressed against his leg. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Show me," Sarah said, grabbing her camera and measurement tape. Dale led her to the horse paddock. The gate stood wide open, the latch not broken but carefully lifted. In the soft earth just inside the gate, Sarah saw what had drained the color from Dale's face. Footprints, enormous humanoid footprints. She knelt slowly, her scientific training warring with the impossibility before her. The track was 17 inches long, 7 inches wide at the ball, with a distinctly human-like arch and 5 visible toe impressions. But the proportions were wrong. The heel was broader, the toes more robust, the overall structure suggesting a weight distribution adapted for something between bipedal and semi-arboreal locomotion. "There are hundreds of them," Dale said quietly, "leading from here to the tree line, and look." He pointed to a secondary set of tracks, hoof prints. His 3 horses had followed the larger prints in single file, walking calmly, not running. Sarah photographed the trail, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. The cattle? Same thing, south pasture. 43 head just walking in formation behind whatever made those tracks. Found them 2 miles into the forest, grazing in a meadow near Sleeping Child Creek. Not scattered, not panicked, just relocated. Sarah followed the trail across the property. At each gate, 7 in total, the same pattern repeated. Latches lifted with precision. No damage to fences or structures. Animals led away in orderly groups, then released in different locations within the wilderness boundary. The chickens had been herded into a dense thicket where foxes and coyotes couldn't easily reach them. The goats were grazing on a slope rich with browse. It was methodical, purposeful, compassionate. "Dale, has anything changed on your property recently? New construction, noise, activity?" He nodded slowly. "Started clearing the north 42 weeks ago. State sold me the adjoining parcel. I was going to expand the operation, build new carving sheds. Brought in equipment, cleared about 8 acres of mixed forest." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "Show me." The cleared land was a wound in the landscape. Raw earth, stumps, slash piles waiting to be burned. It bordered a steep drainage, thick with old-growth cedar and hemlock, the kind of terrain where visibility dropped to a few yards, and sound was swallowed by moss and thyme. "There," Dale whispered. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the shadows of standing timber, Sarah saw what might have been a shelter. Not a structure, nothing as formal as that. But cedar boughs had been arranged against a massive fallen log, creating a lean-to large enough for something very big. The ground beneath was disturbed but not trampled. Nearby, a spring fed a small pool, and next to the pool, arranged with unmistakable intention, were bones. Sarah approached carefully, documenting everything. The bones were old: deer, elk, smaller mammals, cleaned and weathered and laid in a pattern, not random. A cairn, a marker, a boundary stone. "This was a living site," she breathed. "Long-term or seasonal, and you just cleared the approach to it." "Jesus Christ, Doc, what am I looking at?" Sarah turned to face him, and in that moment made a decision that would define everything that followed. "Dale, I need you to not call the sheriff yet. Give me 24 hours. I need to document this properly, and I need to understand what we're dealing with before it becomes a circus. You know what made those tracks?" It wasn't a question. Sarah met his eyes. "I have a hypothesis, but if I'm right, and if this gets out the wrong way, it could be catastrophic, not just for you, for something that's been here a lot longer than your ranch." Dale looked back at the impossible footprints, then at the forest. "They didn't hurt anything. They just moved my animals away from—" he gestured at the clearing, "away from whatever I was destroying." "Yes. How long do you need?" 24 hours, maybe 48. I need to set up cameras, collect samples, and see if contact is possible." "Contact?" Dale laughed. "A brittle sound. You're talking about it like it's a person." "I think it might be," Sarah said quietly, "or something close enough that the distinction matters." She spent the next 6 hours systematically documenting the site. She cast 3 of the best footprints in dental stone, photographed every gate and animal trail, and collected hair samples from a barbed wire fence where something had brushed past. Under her portable microscope, the hair showed a medullary structure, unlike any known primate, with pigmentation patterns that suggested adaptive camouflage, bands of brown, grey and reddish-brown that would blend perfectly with the mixed conifer forests of western Montana. By noon, she'd set up 6 motion-activated trail cameras in a perimeter around the old living site and the new clearing. Then she did something that would have ended her career if her colleagues knew. She left an offering. She'd stopped at a gas station on the drive down and bought apples, honey, and smoked salmon, high-calorie foods that required no hunting or foraging. She placed them on a flat stone near the bone cairn, far enough from the cameras to avoid appearing transactional, close enough to be found, and she waited. Dale offered his guest cabin, a small structure with a wood stove and a view of the forest edge. Sarah sat by the window as afternoon faded to evening, her laptop open to the camera feeds, watching shadows lengthen across the clearing. At 11:34 p.m., one of the cameras triggered. The figure that moved through the frame was massive, easily 8 feet tall, perhaps 500 pounds. Covered in dark hair that caught moonlight like water, it moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible for something so large, each step placed with absolute precision, avoiding dry branches and noisy ground litter. It approached the offerings cautiously, stopping every few feet to scan the surroundings. Sarah held her breath. The face was only partially visible in the infrared glow, but what she could see made her hands shake. The brow ridge was prominent, the face prognathic, but the eyes, even in IR, held something she recognized. Awareness, assessment, intelligence. The creature knelt by the offerings, examining them without touching. Then it did something that stopped Sarah's heart. It looked directly at the nearest camera. Not accidentally. It held the camera's gaze for a full 10 seconds, then deliberately reached out and turned it to face the trees. Message received. I see you. I know you're watching. The creature took the salmon, but left the apples and honey. Then it moved back to the bone cairn and did something extraordinary. It rearranged the bones, adding fresh cedar boughs and small river stones. creating a new pattern. When it finished, the marker had changed from a simple cairn to something more complex, a structure with clear directionality, pointing west along the drainage. Sarah understood. This is the territory boundary. Stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. But there was more. The creature paused before retreating into darkness, then used one massive hand to press shapes into the soft earth near the marker. Deliberate marks. 3 parallel lines, then a gap, then 4 lines. 7 total. Sarah's mind raced. 7 gates opened, 7 groups of animals relocated. It was confirming authorship, saying, I did this. I understand you're watching. This is why. When Dale checked on her at dawn, he found her still at the window, eyes red from sleeplessness, surrounded by printouts of freeze frames and hastily scribbled notes. Did you? Yes. Sarah's voice was hoarse. Dale, I need you to stop the clearing, permanently. I need you to leave that parcel untouched, and I need you to restore the buffer zone around it. Plant native species, create a corridor connecting it to the main wilderness, and I need you to never, ever tell anyone why. What did you see? She turned to him, and he saw something in her expression that made Molly whine and press closer to his legs. I saw a person, Dale. Not human, but a person. Someone who understands cause and effect, who problem solves, who communicates, who removed your animals from danger without harming them because you were about to destroy their home. And if anyone else finds out, if the government, if researchers, if the media get hold of this, that person and their family won't survive what comes next. Dale was quiet for a long time. Finally, the North 40 stays wild. I'll tell the county I changed my mind about expansion. Decided to put it in conservation easement instead. Thank you. What are you going to do? Sarah looked at the freeze frame on her screen, that massive, intelligent face staring directly into the camera. I'm going to try to do something very difficult, she said. I'm going to try to communicate, to establish rules, boundaries, a way for us to coexist without either side feeling threatened. That's crazy. Yes, Sarah agreed. But it's the only ethical choice, because the alternative is either silence, letting them stay invisible and vulnerable, or exposure, which would destroy them. And I'm not sure I can live with either of those options. She spent the rest of that day preparing for something no primatologist had ever attempted: first contact with a hominin species that had successfully hidden from modern science for centuries. The weight of that responsibility felt like stones in her chest. But when she closed her eyes, she saw those 7 marks in the earth, a mind reaching across the species barrier to explain, to justify, to communicate, and she knew she had to try. Sarah returned to Missoula only long enough to grab essential equipment and manufacture a plausible cover story. She told her department head she was conducting an intensive study of elk movement patterns in the Bitterroot, not uncommon for late fall, before hunting season pushed the herds to lower elevations. She loaded her truck with camping gear, camera traps, telemetry equipment, and something she'd used during her doctoral work in Rwanda: a portable solar panel array and a ruggedized tablet loaded with visual communication software. If gorillas could learn symbolic language, could something demonstrably more intelligent do the same? She established a base camp in Dale's guest cabin, but spent most of her time at the forest edge, just inside the buffer zone between the cleared land and the deep woods. Every evening she left offerings, varied now to test preferences and gather data. Smoked fish, fresh fruit, honey, nuts, dried meat. She never left processed foods or anything that might habituate the creature to seeking out human sources. The offerings disappeared each night. Sometimes the salmon was taken, sometimes the apples. Never the honey, which puzzled her until she realized. Honey requires raiding bee colonies, something that would leave lasting scent markers and draw attention. The creature was avoiding anything that might create trackable patterns. Strategic. Forward-thinking. On the 3rd night, she found a return gift. Arranged on the flat stone where she'd left food was a collection of objects. 3 perfect bird feathers, raven, hawk, jay, a piece of obsidian napped into a crude but functional blade, and an elk antler tine marked with parallel scratches, regular intentional marks that might have been counting or decoration. Sarah photographed everything, her hands trembling. This was reciprocity, trade, culture. She left a new offering that night, the tablet propped against a tree, displaying a simple image, a pictograph of two figures, one human-sized, one larger, standing on opposite sides of a line with a circle representing the cleared land between them. Crude but clear. You there, me here, this space between us. The next morning the tablet was gone. She found it 10 yards into the forest, carefully placed on a fallen log, undamaged but with the screen covered in finger smudges. Massive finger smudges. And the image had been changed. Using the touch screen, something that should have been impossible for a wild creature to understand, the figure had drawn a line connecting the two stick figures. Then it had added 3 more large figures behind the original one and a small figure in front. Not alone. Family. Sarah sat down hard, her legs suddenly weak. This wasn't just intelligence. This was abstract representation, numerical understanding, and intentional communication about social structure. This was everything. Over the next 2 weeks, she developed a protocol. Each evening, she left the tablet with a new image or simple symbol. Each morning, she retrieved it and documented the responses. The creature, she'd started thinking of it as elder based on its cautious, deliberate behavior, engaged consistently. She showed images of animals. Elder identified them by touching the screen, sometimes adding scratches to indicate which species they hunted, elk, deer, salmon, versus which they avoided, bear, wolf. She showed images of plants. Elder marked the edible ones, used claw marks to indicate seasons. The breakthrough came on day 17. Sarah created a simple YN interface. 2 boxes, one with a vertical line, yes, one with an X, no. Then she posed a question. Image of a human figure with a question mark. Can I come closer? The response came that night. Yes, box firmly pressed, but with an addition. Elder had drawn a careful circle around the yes, then added marks outside it. Moon phases. 4 crescents. Yes, but wait 4 moon cycles. Wait until winter. Sarah's heart raced. This was calendar awareness, forward planning, and a conditional agreement. Elder was saying, I need time to prepare my family. Come when the snow is deeper and our tracks are harder to follow. Come when it's harder for others to track you to us. Smart, she whispered. You beautiful, brilliant being. But the waiting was torture. Sarah spent November conducting legitimate research, publishing a paper on wolfpack dynamics that would justify her prolonged presence in the region. She checked the cameras obsessively. Elder appeared irregularly, sometimes with the smaller figure, juvenile, adolescent, once with all 3 additional adults. She caught fragments, tool use, a crafted walking stick smoothed and notched, food processing, stones used to crack nuts, and once, something that made her cry. 2 of the figures engaged in what could only be described as grooming, the smaller carefully picking through the larger's shoulder fur. Family, care, social bonds. Dale helped maintain her cover, spreading word that the wildlife doc from the university was doing a winter study. He brought supplies, kept her truck in working order, and never asked questions she couldn't answer. By mid-December, the Bitterroot Valley was locked in deep winter. Snow lay 3 feet deep in the shaded areas, and temperatures dropped below 0 at night. Sarah's camp was winterized, her supplies carefully rationed, and the moon had cycled through the phases Elder had indicated. It was time. She prepared carefully. She dressed in layers, no bright colors, nothing with human scent markers like perfume or strongly scented detergent. She brought the tablet, a camera with telephoto lens, and a medical kit. Nothing else. No weapons, no recording devices beyond the camera, no satellite phone. Trust required vulnerability. She hiked to the bone cairn at dawn, following the established trail. The forest was cathedral quiet under its blanket of snow, every sound muffled, every branch bent under frozen weight. Her breath plumed white in the still air. Elder was waiting. The creature stood beside the cairn, motionless, watching her approach. In full daylight, without the limiting view of camera traps, Elder was simultaneously more and less than Sarah had imagined. The body was massively built. Barrel chest, heavily muscled shoulders and thighs, arms that hung past the knees. The hair was thick, layered, ranging from dark brown to reddish brown to grey, showing age variations that suggested perhaps 40 or 50 years of life. The face was striking, prominent brow ridge, broad flat nose, thin lips, receding chin, but the eyes, deep-set, amber brown, tracking every movement, held unmistakable sapience. Sarah stopped 20 feet away, her heart hammering. She slowly raised the tablet, showing a new image. 2 figures, both with raised hands, peace, greeting, openness. Elder watched for a long moment, then deliberately raised one massive hand, palm forward. "Hello!" Sarah nearly sobbed with relief. She carefully sat down in the snow, cross-legged, making herself smaller and less threatening. Elder remained standing but shifted weight, settling into a more relaxed posture. For several minutes, they simply observed each other. Sarah fought the urge to speak. Vocalizations might be threatening or confusing. Instead, she used the tablet to cycle through images they'd established as common vocabulary. Animals, plants, seasons, safety, danger. Elder responded with hand gestures, some of which Sarah recognized from her work with apes. Pointing, sweeping motions to indicate direction, cupped hands for container carrying. But there were others that seemed unique, a complex finger-twisting motion that accompanied the image of running water, a chest tapping followed by outward sweep that seemed to mean us, we, our people. Proto-language, symbolic communication. Then Elder did something extraordinary. The creature approached the cairn and carefully rearranged the bones, but this time into a clear narrative sequence. First, bones arranged to show a 4-legged figure, elk. Second, the bones scattered to show death-taking. Third, bones rearranged to show a seated figure, human-like, and small figures nearby, family, with the elk bones between them, sharing, feeding. Hunt, provide, family survival. Sarah understood. This was explanation, justification. This is what we do. This is why we take animals sometimes. This is who we are. She used the tablet to create a response. Image of human figure, buildings, fields, civilization, then animals, livestock, then a circle around them. Protection, ownership. She was explaining human territoriality, why Dale reacted to missing animals. Elder studied the images, then made a gesture Sarah interpreted as understanding or agreement. But then the creature added something. Using snow and sticks gathered from nearby, Elder created a model. The stick represented the tree line. Stones represented the ranch, and in the middle, a cleared space. Elder placed one massive finger on the cleared space, then made a sweeping motion toward the stick, forest. The meaning was clear. This was ours. You pushed into it, we responded. Yes, Sarah whispered, forgetting her decision not to vocalize. I understand. We encroached. The animal release was a message, not aggression. Elder's head tilted slightly at the sound of her voice. Then, shockingly, the creature vocalized. It wasn't language as Sarah understood it. The sounds were low, guttural, with strange clicking undertones that suggested a vocal apparatus different from human. But there was structure, repeating patterns, intonation changes, clear demarcation between words. Language. They have language. Sarah felt tears freezing on her cheeks. This was confirmation of everything, the most profound discovery in anthropology, primatology, and evolutionary biology combined. And it could never be shared, because she understood viscerally that exposure would mean extinction. She'd seen what happened when new tribes were contacted in the Amazon: disease, displacement, cultural destruction. She'd studied the history of indigenous peoples worldwide, the systematic erasure, the violence masked as civilization. Elders people had survived by remaining invisible, by adapting to human expansion through avoidance and strategic retreat. Contact with the wider world would end them. Sarah used the tablet to compose a new image. Many human figures, crowd society. Then a single large figure, elders people, surrounded and crossed out, danger, death. She was asking, "Do you understand what would happen if others knew?" Elder's response was immediate and unambiguous. The creature swept one massive hand across the snow model, scattering stones and sticks. Destruction. Yes, we know. We've always known. Then why talk to me? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Why risk this? Elder gestured at the cleared land visible through the trees, then at the model again, placed one finger on the forest edge, then showed that edge shrinking, pushed back by expanding stones, human development, then pointed at Sarah, at the tablet, at the space between them. Because you're here, because we're running out of space, because maybe one human, knowing, can help us survive better than no humans knowing. It was a calculated risk, an act of desperation masked as diplomacy. "I'll help," Sarah said. She used the tablet to create a promise. Human figure with arms spread wide, protection, encompassing the large figures, elders' family. "I'll protect your space. I'll monitor human activity. I'll warn you if danger comes, but I need something from you." She created a new image, large figures with X over them. "Don't do this," showing them near human structures or in clear view. "Stay hidden. Avoid contact with anyone else. No more animal releases unless absolutely necessary. They create patterns, attention." Elder studied this for a long time, then added to the image, drew a line with marks along it, boundary, placed large figures on one side, humans on the other, then drew arrows crossing the line, but only small, infrequent arrows. "We need to cross sometimes. For food, water, movement, we can't be completely blocked in. Negotiation, compromise, coexistence protocols." Sarah nodded eagerly, using the tablet to refine the agreement. Corridor zones, seasonal passages, low visibility crossing times, night weather. She drew weather symbols, rain, fog, snow. Cross in these conditions when visibility is low. Elder added moon symbols, new moon, darkest nights. They worked through the morning, building a framework. Sarah used the tablet to show trail camera locations, marking them as eyes that Elder's family should avoid. Elder used the snow model to show den sites, water sources, foraging zones that needed protection. Sarah learned there were 7 individuals in the family group. Elder, the name stuck in her mind, though she knew it was anthropomorphizing, 3 other adults and 3 juveniles of varying ages. The youngest was perhaps 5 years old, the oldest adolescent maybe 14 or 15. They ranged across approximately 200 square miles, moving seasonally, using high elevation sites in summer and lower riparian zones in winter. They cached food, built temporary shelters, maintained tool caches at strategic locations. They had territories, but they overlapped with at least 2 other groups, with whom they traded goods and occasionally genetic material. Elder's gesture for this was complex but interpretable. Hand-linking, merging of separate groups. Population structure, breeding networks, culture transmission. "How many?" Sarah asked, using the tablet to show many figures with a question mark. "How many of your people total?" Elder's response was devastating. The creature held up both hands, fingers spread. 10, then touched chest. "My group," held up hands again, added 3 fingers. 13, pointed east. Another group, hands again, but this time with 2 fingers. 12, pointed north. Another group, 35 individuals. Maybe. In the entire Bitterroot ecosystem, critically endangered, below minimum viable population. Sarah felt sick. This wasn't just a species hiding from humanity. This was a species circling the drain of extinction, held on only by intelligence, adaptability, and extreme caution. One disease outbreak, one harsh winter, one exposure event could end them entirely. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry we pushed you to this." Elder made a gesture she hadn't seen before, hand to chest, then outward, palm up. She interpreted it as acknowledgement, maybe sadness, maybe acceptance. This is the world. This is our reality. They continued building the protocol. Sarah would monitor human activity in the buffer zones, use specific markers, rocks stacked in particular patterns, to warn of incoming danger, hunters, researchers, forestry operations. Elder would do the same, using trail cameras in reverse, marking them or avoiding them to indicate presence or absence. Sarah would work politically, using her credentials to advocate for conservation easements, expanded wilderness boundaries, reduced human activity in critical zones. She'd disguise it as wolf recovery work, grizzly habitat protection, anything but the truth. Elder would maintain invisibility, teach the young to avoid humans, discourage any action that might create patterns or draw attention. It was a conspiracy of silence, built on mutual need. As the sun reached its winter apex, casting blue shadows through the pines, Sarah prepared to leave. But Elder stopped her with a gesture, then disappeared briefly into the forest. The creature returned carrying something wrapped in cedar bark. Elder carefully unwound the bark, revealing a flat piece of fire-hardened wood, perhaps 18 inches long. Carved into the wood was a map. Sarah recognized the geography immediately. The Bitterroot Valley, rendered in elegant simplicity. Waterways were indicated by wavy lines, mountains by triangular marks, and scattered across the map were symbols, handprints indicating Elder's group, different marks for the other two groups, asterisks for critical sites, dens, water sources, sacred spaces. It was a document, a record, proof that we exist for someone who needs to remember. Sarah accepted it with shaking hands. "I'll keep it safe. I promise. No one else will see it." Elder made the chest-touch outward gesture again, then pointed at Sarah, at the map, at the forest. The message was complex but clear. "You are the keeper. You are the bridge. Remember us. Help us survive unseen." "I will," Sarah said. "For as long as I live, I will." Elder turned to leave, then paused. The creature looked back. And for a moment, Sarah saw something in those amber eyes that transcended species, recognition, gratitude, and profound loneliness. "We are the last of something ancient, and you are the only witness." Then Elder was gone, moving through the deep snow with impossible silence, leaving barely a trace. Sarah stood alone in the clearing, the map clutched to her chest, and wept for everything that was being lost. Species that would never be named, languages that would never be documented, histories that would die with their last speaker. But she had made a choice. Sometimes the most ethical act is bearing witness in silence. Sometimes the greatest discovery is the one never shared. She would carry this secret to her grave. And she would dedicate every remaining day to ensuring that Elder's children, those 3 vulnerable young lives, might survive long enough to have children of their own. The weight was crushing, but it was also a gift, the gift of mattering, of purpose, of standing between extinction and survival for something irreplaceable. Sarah packed the map carefully in waterproof wrapping, then began the long walk back to Dale's ranch, leaving no trail, disturbing no snow. She had become what Elder needed, a guardian who could never speak the truth, a scientist who would bury her greatest discovery, a witness to the invisible. And somehow it was enough. Winter deepened into its harshest phase. January brought temperatures that plunged to 20 below zero, turning the Bitterroot Valley into a landscape of crystalline brutality. Sarah maintained her cover study, documenting elk movements while secretly monitoring the network of markers she and Elder had established throughout the buffer zone. The protocol worked, almost invisibly. 3 times, Sarah stacked rocks in the warning pattern when logging operations approached too close to known den sites. Each time, within 24 hours, her trail cameras showed the family group had relocated to secondary positions. Twice, Elder marked camera sites with specific scratches, the code for human activity increasing, temporary withdrawal, and Sarah adjusted her own patterns accordingly, staying away from those areas for weeks. To outside observers, she was simply a dedicated biologist conducting winter fieldwork. Dale continued to provide cover, occasionally mentioning to neighbors that the doc from U of M is still chasing those elk herds around. The conservation easement on the North 40 went through without comment, just another rancher getting a tax break for preserving habitat. But beneath the surface of normalcy, Sarah was dying inside. The ethical contradictions gnawed at her constantly. She was sitting on the most significant anthropological discovery in human history, evidence of a sister species, a parallel evolution of high intelligence, a mirror showing what humanity might have been if we'd chosen different paths. Every scientific instinct screamed to document, publish, share. The potential for understanding human evolution, cognition, language development, and social behavior was incalculable. But every ethical instinct, every molecule of compassion, demanded silence, because she knew, with the sick certainty of someone who'd studied conservation's failures, what disclosure would bring. First would come the researchers, descending like locusts, geneticists demanding blood samples, anthropologists documenting every behavior, linguists recording vocalizations, then the government agencies, fish and wildlife, establishing protocols, Homeland Security worried about border security, the Forest Service restricting access, then the media, helicopters, zoom lenses, 24-hour coverage of Bigfoot confirmed real. Finally, the public, tour operators, crypto hunters, thrill seekers, and inevitably those who saw elders' people as trophies or threats. The family couldn't survive that kind of attention. The population was too small, too fragile, too dependent on invisibility. So Sarah documented everything in encrypted files she'd never share, and she waited for the ice to break. The crisis came on February 14th. Sarah was checking cameras near Sleeping Child Creek when she found fresh tracks, human tracks, multiple sets, with the distinctive chevron patterns of military-style boots. She followed them, her stomach tight with dread, and found what she feared most: a new trail camera, professional grade, positioned to monitor the primary access route to Elder's winter range. The camera wasn't hers, wasn't Dale's, wasn't fish and wildlife. She checked the unit carefully without triggering it. No agency markings, no contact information, but sophisticated, cellular-enabled, high-resolution, infrared-capable. Someone was conducting surveillance, and they knew exactly where to look. Sarah documented the camera's location, then hiked back to her truck at near-running pace. She needed to warn Elder immediately, but the rock-stacking protocol might not be fast enough if whoever placed that camera was monitoring in real time. She made a decision that violated every rule she'd established: direct intervention. She hiked to the bone cairn in late afternoon, knowing she was risking exposure by coming during daylight. She pulled out the tablet and set it up, displaying a single, urgent image, human figures with weapons pointed at Elder's position. Danger. Now. Others are hunting you. Then she waited, praying Elder would check the location before nightfall. The sun was setting, temperature dropping fast, when she heard movement. Not Elder, but one of the other adults. She'd privately started calling them Sentinel, based on the individual's cautious, protective behaviors around the juveniles. Sentinel approached warily, staying partially concealed behind a massive cedar. Sarah kept perfectly still, non-threatening. Sentinel studied the tablet for a long moment, then vocalized. A low, urgent sound, unlike the measured tones she'd heard from Elder. Alarm! Warning understood. Sentinel moved forward, grabbed the tablet, and did something unexpected. The creature flipped through recent images, reviewing the communication history, then carefully used the drawing function to add new information. The picture that emerged was chilling. Sentinel drew human figures, but with specific additions. Hats with badges, law enforcement, vehicles, trucks, and crucially, a timeline marked with sun symbols. 5 suns. 5 days of observation. They've been watching longer than we knew. Sarah's heart sank. If the camera she'd found was part of a larger surveillance network, Elder's family might already be compromised. But who? And why? Sentinel answered before she could process the question. The creature drew a new symbol, a figure holding up an object, camera or phone, then crossing it out, then showing multiple human figures with dollar signs. Trophy hunters. Someone selling information about us. The crypto hunting community. Someone had found evidence, probably trail camera footage from recreational hunters or hikers, and was selling coordinates to people who wanted to bag a Bigfoot. It was Sarah's worst nightmare, the exact scenario she'd been trying to prevent. How many cameras? Sarah asked, using the tablet to show multiple eye symbols. How many do you know about? Sentinel held up 3 fingers, then gestured broadly. More, uncertain, scattered. At least 3, possibly more. A coordinated surveillance net. Sarah made a rapid decision. I need 48 hours. I'm going to find them and destroy them, but you need to move. Now. Take the family as far from here as possible. Go to the alternate range, the high country we marked. Sentinel studied her for a long moment, then made the chest-touch outward gesture, acknowledged trust. The creature turned to leave, then stopped and came back. Sentinel placed something in Sarah's hand, a small object wrapped in soft leather. Inside was a stone, river-smoothed, marked with careful scratches. Elder's symbol, Sentinel's symbol, and the 3 smaller marks representing the juveniles. Remember us. If we don't survive, remember we were here. You'll survive, Sarah said fiercely. I won't let this happen. But Sentinel was already gone, melting into the darkening forest with barely a sound. Sarah spent the next 36 hours in a fever of activity. She located 2 more cameras, one near the spring, one overlooking a game trail the family used for travel. All were the same model, all cellular-enabled. She documented their locations, then systematically destroyed each one, making it look like animal damage. Bears investigating unusual objects, elk rubbing antlers against the posts, but destruction wouldn't be enough. Whoever placed the cameras would notice the outage, would come back to investigate, might place more. She needed to misdirect them entirely. Sarah spent the next 12 hours in her truck, laptop open, using every database access her university credentials provided. She cross-referenced trophy hunting forums, crypto hunter websites, local social media groups. Finally, she found it, a user called Wilderness Watcher who'd posted on 3 separate forums about confirmed thermal hits in the Bitterroot, offering coordinates and timing data for serious inquiries only. Price negotiable. The posts were 3 weeks old. Response threads showed at least a dozen interested parties. Sarah created a false account and reached out to Wilderness Watcher, posing as a wealthy hunter. The response came within an hour. $10,000 for camera data and GPS coordinates. Crypto accepted for anonymity. She had no intention of paying, but she needed to identify this person. She traced the account through VPN layers, cross-referenced posting patterns and timestamps, looked for associated accounts. It took 6 more hours and several legal gray areas she didn't want to think about, but finally she had a name. Kevin Birch, 34, unemployed, living in Hamilton, Montana, 30 miles north of Dale's Ranch. She found his social media. Photos of trophy kills, elk, mule deer, bear, posts about pursuing the ultimate trophy, comments on crypto hunting forums about retiring rich off one good find. This man was going to get Elder's family killed for money. Sarah sat in her truck in a grocery store parking lot in Missoula, shaking with rage and fear. She had information, but what could she do with it? Report him? For what crime? Placing trail cameras on public land was legal. Hunting Bigfoot wasn't technically illegal, because legally Bigfoot didn't exist. She couldn't go to authorities without explaining how she knew what Birch was tracking. She couldn't expose him without exposing Elder. There was only one option, and it made her sick. She had to scare him off, permanently. Sarah spent 2 days preparing. She used her university position to request a meeting with Fish and Wildlife, claiming she'd found evidence of illegal hunting activity in the Bitterroot. She provided them with Birch's name and documentation of the cameras, not mentioning what they were targeting, only that someone was conducting surveillance in designated wilderness. Then she paid Birch a visit. She found him at a bar in Hamilton, drunk and bragging to friends about the big score coming. She waited until he left, then followed him to his truck. "Kevin Birch?" He turned, suspicious. "Who's asking?" Sarah pulled out her university ID and a forged Fish and Wildlife consultant badge she'd created using equipment in the biology department. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Wildlife Crimes Investigation. We need to talk about your camera installations in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness." She watched the color drain from his face. "I don't know what—" "You've been tracking a protected species in violation of federal law. I have documentation of your cameras, your social media posts, and your attempts to sell location data. The penalties include up to 5 years in federal prison and fines up to $250,000. All of it was lies. The badge was fake, the laws she cited didn't apply, and she had no actual authority. But Birch didn't know that. What protected species? There's no law against... "There is when the target is on the endangered species list," Sarah said coldly. "The species you've been tracking is part of a classified conservation program. Your surveillance has compromised a breeding population that's taken 30 years to establish. Fish and Wildlife takes this extremely seriously." She pulled out a folder she'd prepared, full of official-looking documents she'd created, stamped with forged seals, citing regulations that sounded plausible. "You have 2 options. Option 1. I file a formal report, and you're arrested within 48 hours. The crypto hunting forums you've been using will be subpoenaed, your buyers identified and charged as accomplices. Your family's property in Hamilton will be seized under asset forfeiture laws." Birch looked like he might vomit. "Option 2. You remove all cameras immediately, delete all data, cease all surveillance activity, and sign a non-disclosure agreement with the federal government. You never speak about what you found, never return to the area, and never engage in similar activity again. In exchange, no charges are filed, and this conversation never happened." She held out a document, another forgery, full of legal language and penalties for violation. "How do I know you're not lying?" Birch asked, but his voice was weak. "You don't," Sarah said. "But ask yourself, do you really want to risk 5 years in federal prison and financial ruin to find out? Is it worth it for a species you haven't even confirmed exists?" She deliberately introduced doubt, let him tell himself maybe he was wrong, maybe it was just bears or elk creating the thermal signatures. Birch stared at the document for a long moment, then grabbed a pen from his pocket. He signed without reading it carefully, his hand shaking. "All the cameras," Sarah demanded. There's 8 of them. I'll pull them tomorrow. Tonight, all of them. You have until dawn. And Kevin?" She leaned closer. "If I find out you've been back to that area, if you've spoken to anyone about this, if you've contacted any of your buyers, the deal is void and the charges proceed. Am I clear?" "Crystal." Sarah left him standing in the parking lot, returned to her truck, and drove 3 blocks before pulling over to vomit in the gutter. She'd just committed multiple crimes: impersonating a federal agent, fraud, intimidation. If Birch reported her, her career was over, possibly her freedom. But she'd done it. She'd protected Elder's family. She spent the next 2 days monitoring the areas where she knew cameras had been placed. One by one, they disappeared, Birch fulfilling his forced promise. On the 3rd day, she returned to the bone cairn and left a message on the tablet. All clear symbol, circle with no X, human figures walking away, threat departed. She didn't expect to see Elder again. The family would be in their high country retreat, waiting for the danger to pass completely. But at dawn on the 4th day, she found fresh tracks near her camp. Massive tracks leading to a carefully arranged gift, An entire elk hide, cleaned and dried, marked with symbols she was beginning to understand. The family's mark, a specific boundary marker, and repeated images of Sarah's own symbol, the one Elder had assigned to her months ago. Thank you. You kept the promise. You protected us when we couldn't protect ourselves. Beneath the hide was something else, a second piece of carved wood, matching the map Elder had given her before. But this one showed the other two family groups' territories, their locations, their markers, their safe zones. Trust expanded, responsibility deepened. Sarah understood. She wasn't just guarding one family anymore. She was being entrusted with the survival of the entire regional population, 35 souls, give or take, depending on her ability to stay silent and vigilant. The weight was almost unbearable. She sat by the cairn and cried for the beauty of what existed, for the horror of what threatened it, for the impossibility of the task she'd taken on, and for the loneliness of being the only human who knew. Dale found her there hours later. "Sarah, you okay?" She looked up at him, eyes swollen. "Dale, I need to tell you something, about why I really need that buffer zone protected, about what I've been doing here all winter." He sat down beside her. "I figured it wasn't just elk." She told him everything. The communication, the protocol, the population size, the threat she'd neutralized, and the responsibility she now carried. She showed him the maps, the symbols, the stone the juvenile's representative had given her. "Jesus Christ," Dale whispered. "They're real. They're really real." "And they're dying," Sarah said. 35, Dale. That's all that's left in this entire ecosystem. One bad winter, one disease outbreak, one person with a rifle and a dream of fame. That's all it would take. What do you need? I need the buffer zone to become permanent. I need you to use your connections. Your family's been here for 3 generations. People trust you to push for expanded wilderness protections, wolf corridors, grizzly habitat, spotted owl conservation, anything that keeps humans out of those critical zones. She pointed to the maps. These areas here and here and here. They're not just ecologically important. They're the only places these people have left. Dale studied the maps for a long time. "I can do that. I know people on the county commission, Forest Service contacts from the old timber days. I can make noise about conservation easements, get other ranchers on board." "Thank you. But Sarah, what about you? You can't stay here forever. What happens when your research project ends?" That was the question she'd been avoiding. Her fellowship ran through spring. After that, she'd need a new position, new funding, a new justification for staying in the area. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to find a way. I'm the only one who can communicate with them, the only one who knows the truth. If I leave, there's no early warning system, no one to interfere when the next Kevin Birch shows up." "Then we'll figure it out," Dale said firmly. "Maybe you take a job locally. Maybe we create a position. The ranch could use a wildlife consultant. Maybe the county hires you for long-term carnivore monitoring. We'll find a way to keep you here." Sarah felt a flood of gratitude. She wasn't completely alone in this anymore. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, melting frost from the pine branches, turning the snow to diamonds of light. Somewhere in the vast wilderness stretching away from them, Elder's family was beginning another day, foraging, teaching the young, maintaining the impossibly delicate balance between survival and invisibility. Sarah made a silent promise. However long it took, whatever sacrifices were required, she would be the guardian they needed, the witness who would never speak, the bridge between two worlds that could never openly meet. It was the most important work she'd ever do, and no one would ever know. That night, she returned to her cabin and began writing, not for publication, but for the future. A complete record of everything she'd learned, every communication, every protocol, encrypted and hidden. If something happened to her, if the worst occurred, someone would need to know the truth. She titled the document simply, "The Last People," a testament, and she wrote through the night, recording everything, knowing that silence was survival, but that memory was sacred. By dawn, she had created the only comprehensive ethnography of a people who could never be known to exist. It would never see publication, but it would exist, hidden, waiting, because even invisible people deserve to be remembered. What would you do if you discovered something that could change the world, but only by keeping it secret? If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of Sarah's impossible choice, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of speculative fiction readers who crave stories that challenge, question, and illuminate. Like this video if you believe some truths are worth protecting, and drop a comment below. Would you have made Sarah's choice? Is silence sometimes the most ethical path? What would you sacrifice to protect something precious? New stories every week. Mysteries that probe the boundaries between science and ethics, hope and heartbreak, discovery and responsibility. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Subscribe now and become part of the conversation. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most profound discoveries are sometimes the ones we choose to keep.